Stephen, I'm very happy to have you again. And this time we're going to talk about the Central Asian or Tatar geography. We are talking about towns in the inner Asia that some of European explorers visited in 13th century. We were talking about a town called Ornas. Where's the exact location of Ornas? And do we have
So,
material evidence, remains of structures, remains of public buildings at that place?
uh, yes. So the city of Ornas is also known as Hornak. We see Hornak, and once we even see Hornax in Latin sources in the 1200s, and they're referring to some great city in Inner Asia. And the way that Latin Europeans, of course, they didn't go to Inner Asia, or at least we don't have evidence. There were Europeans in of course, the Levant and Egypt, places like that in the Eastern Mediterranean. But Europeans didn't really venture deep into the Inner Asia, and yet they keep mentioning this city in the 1200s. We have Elbrick of Trois-Fontaines, a Cistercian friar. He was writing a sort of chronicle in the 1200s. And in 1221, roughly, he writes that the great city of Pornax or Pornak was destroyed by the Mongols. So that would date it around the Horasmian campaign when the Persian Horasmian Empire fought against Genghis Khan and lost badly. Then the next references we have to Hornak, taken prisoner in probably Hungary and transported to Belgium, today's Belgium, where he was interrogated. And he lists the conquests of the Mongols, and he said they destroyed the country of Ornak. And that was in 1241 that this interview took place. Then the next references we have from European authors recording this name is, and I mean like Latin Western European authors, is when John of Plano Carpini and his party of Franciscan friars traveled as emissaries of the Pope, and they went across Asia, right to from Italy to or Lyon, France, all the way to Mongolia back. And they wrote about the Mongols and their diplomatic exchanges, but they also were writing geography. And it was a really big breakthrough for the Latin West world to have this dry, precise knowledge of Inner Asia. Because really, Europeans so often didn't go there, or at least anyone who did never survived or came back or wrote about it. So in the Middle Ages, European authors in the 1100s and earlier were just using Ptolemy and Strabo, these ancient authors, Pliny the Elder, etc. They just had the ancient version of Asia, and it was full of all kinds of errors. It's actually quite they had a lot of knowledge in ancient times, but it was outdated, etc. So when Carpini and friends, these Italian friars, journeyed to Mongolia in the mid 1200s, they brought back real precise eyewitness accounts of what geography was like, which isn't to say that everything they described was something they saw. And I think this city of Hornak or Ornas was a place they didn't actually see, because I believe that the city of Hornak was Urgench, the city of Urgench, which was on just south of the Aral Sea.
Yeah.
And there's a slight resemblance in the name Ornak, Ornas, Urgench. And Urgench was the capital of the Harasmians. It was their greatest city. Um, but the problem was, and the historical problem is that the waters around that area have changed. The Aral Sea has grown and shrank. In our own time, it has shrunken again. The rivers changed course. The great Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers can change course as they flow towards the Aral Sea from their like places where that they originate. Their sources, I guess you should say. But the landscape has sort of gone through a lot of changes through the centuries. So the identity of Ornak, that these Latin writers describe, has been a great debate for about 2 centuries. And I think that we owe this to two things. One, Carpini and his party and other Latin writers had never actually gone to the city of Urgench. And two, the landscape has changed and it was so changeable in that region that it can confuse people a bit about what this city was. But I think it was clearly Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital city. And there are some ruins of it today. Not much, but the site is there. It's called Konya Urgench now, because that means in Turkic it means the old Urgench, because they now have the new Urgench, which is somewhat east of Konya, of the ruins. But in the 1200s, when these Latin writers mentioned it, they're speaking about the Konya Urgench. Modern Urgench is a modern city. It's shaped by more recent developments in recent centuries. So it has the same name, but it's not at the original site.
So the city was shrouded with the mystery, like all kinds of legends attributed to Timbuktu in Africa, where different travelers and explorers created all kinds of fairy tales.
Exactly.
It sounds like Timbuktu, which is in fact a very modest town without golden domes and without golden buildings. What was the role of Batu in that campaign? We're talking about the Great Western Campaign from 1236 to 1242.
Well, so related to Timbuktu, what you said, a problem we have is that modern readers don't really trust what a medieval person has to say about great cities in the East, because in the 1200s, Latin writers from Europe were also talking about a Prester John, some holy king in the East, and they believed he was a Christian. And so when they heard the rumors in the 1220s that this great army is coming from the East and it's destroying the Khwarezmian Empire, which was Islamic, the Latin army, the European army in Egypt in the Fifth Crusade thought that this was the great Prester John, or maybe his son coming to rescue them. So there were a lot of myths and legends. And so when modern readers come across these claims about Hornak or Ornas, they don't see it as something totally credible or trustworthy. They think maybe these are just swirling rumors, maybe these are. But there have been 3 identifications of it that have gone on for 2 centuries of debate with scholars. One is Urgench, like I think, I agree with that opinion, but it's long been suggested. Another is Tana on the mouth of the Don River. And a third one is Otrar in modern Kazakhstan. But in the case of Batu, Carpini, the Latin visitor to Mongolia, confused the story about Urgench, and he thought that Batu had destroyed it. But if in fact, as it seems, what Carpini had heard about was the taking of Urgench in 1221, then in fact Batu was not the leader who took Urgench. It was actually his father, Jochi. Genghis Khan's son Jachi, and Ogadai and Chagatai, three sons of Genghis Khan, besieged Urgench, and they took it in 1221 and destroyed the city. It was a horrific siege. There were still skeletons of all the besiegers all around the city centuries later. If you read sources from the 1600s or 1500s, they'll say the skeletons of the Mongols are still lining the banks of the rivers. So this was one of the worst military disasters that had ever happened in Genghis Khan's career. They did take Urgench and destroy the capital of the Khwarezmian Empire, but it put up such a strong fight that it became sort of an infamous battle. And Genghis Khan's sons didn't get along after this battle because they blamed each other for the failures of their siege. So after the battle, Jachi just went north into the kind of the steppes, the Pontic steppes near the Caspian Sea, and he died in maybe 1225 to 1227, and he never really continued the expansion westward. But when he died, his son Batu took over the throne of his territory in about 1227, and Batu became the commander of the Great Western Campaign that finally conquered the Kipchak Cumans, the city of Bulgar, the Mordvins, the whole of the Rus, the Russian land, and they pushed all the way into Poland and Hungary, into even Austria and Bohemia. So Batu he would have owned Urgench, it seems. That was part of his patrimony, but he didn't conquer it. He inherited it from his father. But even though the city was destroyed in 1221, it continued. So they may have brought new settlers into it, and it became a trading city. Oftentimes the Mongols would destroy a city, but then it would just pop back up again, almost like a sort of anthill. I mean, especially if it was on a really good trade route or it had a historic importance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they controlled the Silk Road. They completely took over the control of the Silk Road once they established their Eurasian realm.
And it's very strange to me that this Urgench identification wasn't more obvious, or that it's even been a debate, because Urgench was such an important city that a 1500s Turkic inter-Asian writer said anyone who wishes to rule the whole of Asia, they mean really the Silk Road, it's like you have to take Urgench. And another thing was Urgench's other name at the time was Khwarezm itself. Yeah. The oasis of Khwarezm was this spot south of the Aral Sea where there's two giant rivers, two of the biggest rivers in Inner Asia were connecting or close to the Aral Sea. The Sirdaria River and the Oxus, Amu Darya River. Yeah. And both of these rivers, they're in ancient literature. Alexander the Great, Darius, the emperor of the Persians, crossed this river and attacked the Scythians. This has always been a key, for economic activity. Urgench is a perfect site at the edge of the Amu Darya River and leading into all the Silk Road cities east of there. So it's an important city, and it was described by these Latin authors like Carpini and Alberic of Poisfontaine. They describe how it was full of merchants from all kinds of different ethnic groups. The city of Ornas, Ornak, that was destroyed by the Mongols. They say it had merchants from all over the world. And when they say that, I think if this is a true story, it must have been this very important city that was really the capital of the Khwarezm Empire when Genghis Khan destroyed it. But there are other clues too.
How Genghis Khan's descendants justified Turid claims?
Okay, so that ties to this fall of the city, the siege of the city of Urgench. According to the secret history, Chinggis Khan assigned his three sons, his three oldest sons, Jochi, Ogadai, and Chagatai, to take the great capital city of the Horazm Empire out. And he went, and Chinggis Khan himself went somewhere else, into Afghanistan, actually. Um, but that siege was a disaster, and the brothers started to get at each other's throats, quite literally, according to the secret history. Chagatai was so angry at Jochi around this time that he said, you're a bastard. You're not even a real son of Chinggis Khan." And there was a horrible controversy about this. And Chinggis Khan really wanted to make an empire that would last forever. In fact, some of the statements we have from him, and this won't often come up in the secondary literature, but if you look at what he said, he was always thinking, how do I make an empire that will last forever? How do I make it so that my sons don't fight? How do I make it so that people don't forget what kept this empire? Because perhaps Chinggis Khan had heard of steppe empires that, like Attila, maybe not Attila, but he heard of these Gok Turks or what have you, that they rose up, they became this great empire, and then sure enough, two brothers both make a claim to the throne and they fight over it. It's just a trap that nomadic uh, federations, confederations, empires, they just fall into this. The family members can't stand each other. They start to make their own independent kingdoms, and the whole thing unravels. And if you actually read Chinggis Khan's apparently real statements that he made when he was living, very many of them are concerned with how he can make an empire that will last through the ages and make a name for himself that will be remembered. He actually did care about that, according to the sources. So when this conflict between his sons happened at the big city on the Amu Darya River, Chinggis Khan heard about the fiasco, and I think he made a decision that he had to separate his two sons, Chagatai and Jochi. So they were both. So Jochi went to the northeast. He went out into the steppes of Kazakhstan and sort of just faded away, hunting and whatnot. He founded a great dynasty, but he died just a few years later. And Chagatai was kind of put far, far away from him in the Silk Road cities area, like Bukhara and Xinjiang,
Yeah.
very far east of. And I think Chinggis Khan's strategy here, because he was himself getting old, he knew he wasn't going to live forever. By the 1220s, he was feeling his age. And he thought, I have to keep these two guys far away from each other. So Jachi will have his own territory way off in the northwest near the Rus and Kipchaks, and he can conquer the Kipchaks and just stay away from Chagatai. Because if they're close to each other, there could be a civil war. And meanwhile, Ogadai was chosen as the successor to the throne because he was kind of a peacemaker. Chinggis Khan saw that Ogadai didn't get involved in the fight between the brothers. He was a good middleman, so he may have chosen Jochi originally to be the successor. Chinggis Khan may have originally wanted his eldest son to be the successor, but he couldn't now because of the conflict between Chagatai and Jochi. So he chose his third son, Ogadai. But which son in this story has completely avoided any of this trouble? It's the fourth and youngest son of Chinggis Khan, Tolui. And he was off in Merv, cities like this in Turkestan. He was just doing his own conquests, kind of close to Chinggis Khan. So he didn't get involved in this controversy up at the city of Urgench. He was, and Tolui also had many military successes. He had the reputation as being the greatest warrior of all four sons, kind of a heroic figure. And so Chinggis Khan kept him a little closer to him as he continued his conquests into Iran and a Persian state that had now collapsed. So Tolui was avoiding all of this. And the upshot of it all is that you have these controversies, you have these bad relationships, but in the end, Tolui kept a squeaky clean reputation. And when Chinggis Khan died, only a few years later, Tului died. But so that was around 1232 or so, he died. Yet, and after a great victory against the Jin dynasty of China, so he dies like a kind of a hero, but at a young age. But all of his land and his winnings and the troops he had under him, that went to his very shrewd wife, Sorkaktani Beki, and she raised his sons, Munka, and Kublai, um, Hulagu. And these guys are going to be the real winners in the third generation of the Mongol Empire because they basically stole it from the Ogadayad line. The Tuluids just took over the empire in around 1250. So they had this ancestor. Had a good reputation, and they just decided to take the throne from the Ogadayads, and they marginalized the other princes' families.
I mean, we have references of Ornas in 18th, early 19th century by the Russian historian Nikolai Karamzin, who wrote a 12-volume history of the Russian state, which was
Right. Yes.
for that time it was an important book where also he also dealt with the Mongol phase of the Russian state, if we can call that a Russian state, because nowadays we have different opinions about Kiev and Rus and their relations to Moscow. What his book tells us about Ornas? Did he have a precise geographical knowledge of the location of that city?
He believed so. He started this whole debate
Mhm.
in scholarship because modern scholarship is kind of 200 years of heavy duty debates and stuff that. So he was at the start of the 1800s, and he thought Ornas, when he came across this name, he said, Isn't this not Tana?"
Yeah.
Meaning he thinks it's probably Tana. And there was actually Urgench or Ernak was often mentioned in Rus chronicles because Rus traders would even go to this city of Urgench. But yet Karamzin thought it was Tana. Um, and here's the reason he might have thought that. So many popular scholars since then, preeminent scholars, including recent, like 20 years ago, Donald Ostrovsky, they defend the Tana idea, that Ornas is Tana, but I think it's not. But I understand why scholars, starting with Karamzin, did think so. They think it because Carpini said that this great city of Ornas was on a big river next to the sea, next to the sea. And so Tana is on the Don River entering the Sea of Azov or Sea of Azov, which is just part of the Black Sea. So really it's part of the ocean. So it made sense to more modern readers when they read that Carpini is talking about a great trading city that's on the sea, on the seashore. They would have thought, well, this must be a big sea. This can't be something, this can't be an inland lake. So it must be the Black Sea. And Tana became one of the most important Italian Mongol cooperated slave trade cities in like the 13 and 1400s. They were selling so-called Tatar slaves,
Mhm.
probably Kipchaks, different kinds of people who were just sold into slavery in Crimea and Tana. Uh, Italian merchants would buy them in the 13 and 1400s, and they would take them sometimes to Egypt and sell them into the Mameluke armies. So there was a huge slave trade going on from the nomadic wars in the conquest of the Mongols, etc., would have created a market of slaves. And the Italian merchants like Genoa and Venice came swooping in and saw the chance. So Tana became a very famous city. But the problem was Tana was probably not existent in the 1240s and 1250s when Carpini and these other uh, Europeans are traveling there. They don't mention Tana, um, where it should be. Tana actually became a much more prominent city only in the 1300s. At most, it would have been a tiny village in Carpini's time. But the reason that modern scholars thought that Ornas might be Tana is because Tana was right on the coast of the Black Sea. So that's what Karamzin suggested. But I think it's they're forgetting about the Aral Sea, which is such a big lake. Even though it's not part of the ocean, it's such a big lake that a medieval writer could easily call that the sea. They also thought the Caspian Sea, for instance, was part of the ocean. They corrected that, but you know, if it's a big, huge body of water, they'll just call it a sea. And so I think what they're actually thinking about was the Aral Sea, and the Aral Sea's size has greatly fluctuated. But at the time when Chinggis Khan's sons destroyed Urgench in 1221, there was a lot of irrigation works that that had been undertaken that had really made the waters of the Amu Darya River cool in the Aral Sea. Like the Aral Sea has shrank and grown back several times between Chinggis Khan's time and now. But what happened in 1221 was Chinggis Khan's sons tried to destroy these irrigation works to flood the city. And so if they had this extensive irrigation system, they were probably directing the Amu Darya into the Aral Sea, which means it would have been bigger than it is today. And it can easily pool into this area that's right beside the ruins of Konya Urgench. And thankfully, we have 1800s survey maps from French, Russian, etc., fleets and surveyors, geographers, and the Aral Sea is bigger than even it was at the start of the 1900s, where it's sort of an oval shape. And now it's, of course, it's very, very small. It's almost disappearing. But that has happened before. And in the 1800s, we see that when it gets bigger, these sort of pools flood that go right up to the shore of Urgench. And so that's probably how it looked, I speculate. I'm not a earth sciences sort of guy, but I suspect the Khwarezm Empire had designed the irrigation works to really create a reservoir in the Aral Sea. And this water would have been so close to the city of Urgench, just like it was in the 1800s. So, yeah, I'm thinking it's not the Black Sea. It's not Tana, which wasn't even an important city in the 1240s. Rather, we're talking about a larger Aral Sea than we have today, and even larger than we had 100 years ago. But you can see in the 1800s, it went right up to the banks beside the city of Konya Urgench.
What was the relation between Karakorum, which was established at that time, and cities near Aral Sea?
So one of the writers, Friar Julian, one of the earliest European sources about the Mongol Empire, he was a Hungarian friar again, and his explorations went as far as the Volga River and the kind of Volga Bulgar. So he went quite far east, close to the Ural Mountains, and he supposedly found a group of people who spoke Hungarian, and they were the old Hungarians who had not migrated to Europe centuries earlier. And he met them and he was trying to Christianize them, but the Mongols were in the area threatening to destroy it. And when Friar Julian came back, the Mongols had already launched their Great Western Campaign under Batu, and they had destroyed this old Hungary. They had destroyed Volga Bulgar. They were crushing. They were just on the verge of destroying the Rus, and that's when Friar Julian fled back to Europe to warn everyone about the coming Mongol Empire, and that people didn't even know about in Europe. And he said these guys are coming for us. They're going to conquer Hungary. They're going to conquer Germany. They're going to conquer Rome. And so he tried to find out everything he could about the Mongol Empire from the Rus and other people in the East who knew them. And he said that their capital, their great Khan, lives in a city called Ornak. So this has caused even more confusion because we know Ogadai lived in Karakorum, as you said, in Mongolia, which is nowhere near Urgench on the Aral Sea. So in this case, I think Friar Julian just equated the great city of Urgench with the Mongol capital thousands of kilometers away. But there could be an intriguing reason for that. Karakorum is built on a riverbank, and that river name is a word that sounds a lot like Ornak. What is it? Sorry, maybe we can edit this part out. I gotta check.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was hoping I wouldn't forget this, but Orkhan. Okay, sorry. I'll
Yeah,
start again now.
no problem. Go ahead.
So the Mongol capital that was founded by Ogadai Khan in Mongolia and named Karakorum
Yeah.
is on the Orkhan River, which is quite an important river in Mongolia. So if we imagine Friar Julian is hearing all this information about places he has never been to, and he hears that Ogadai Khan has a capital on the Orkhan, he might then associate that with Hornak, which is Urgench, which is just a European corruption of the word Urgench. And besides that, Jochi's primary city, so Jochi and Batu, the Jochid Ulus, their country, the biggest city in it was Urgench. So there's a double reason why Friar Julian may have equated Karakorum with Urgench. First of all, it's the Urgench is the biggest city in Inner Asia that any Europeans know about. And secondly, Karakorum was built on the Orkhon River. It didn't right away have the name Karakorum. If any kind of mention of the city on the Orkhon came to Friar Julian, he could have just thought, oh, right, yeah, the big city of Hornak. Yeah. And so that one's an error. Friar Julian is an error. But in all other cases, whether it's Carpini, etc., when they're talking about Ornas, Ornak, they're actually talking consistently, I think, about Urgench on the Aral Sea, near the Aral Sea.
What's the problem with identifying Ornas as Tana? Donald Ostrowski, the historian specialized in Mongols, wrote about that.
Well, when you look at the details from charter evidence in Italy, Italian writings about the city of Tana, you realize it didn't seem to even exist at all. The very first mention of it you'll find in these copious Italian records is maybe the 1270s, 1280s. And it's nothing. It's a tiny little village. It's just a trade post, like a Hudson's Bay trading post in
Yeah.
Canadian history. It's not a great city. Whereas Carpini and all these other authors keep saying that Urgench is the greatest city in the area of Inner Asia. Like it's the biggest city, and traders come from the Greeks, the Arabs, the Rus, etc. So that doesn't match with Tana. Tana became very important after the Black Death in the mid 1300s. Italy had a labor shortage, but you couldn't enslave people in Europe, in theory, because the papacy made that illegal. But if you went off into the Black Sea, into the Crimea, into these regions where there's no bishop, no bishopric oversight, then the Italian merchants could start human trafficking, which they did with great enthusiasm, and so Tana became very built up. They of course they had to rent the land from the Golden Horde because the Mongols, Jochi's descendants owned, Crimea and all this territory, but they worked with these Italian merchants and they let them rent
Hmm?
the territory of the city and set up these big cities like Kaffa, which would
Yeah,
later become the famous Black Death
of course. That was the
catapult.
epicenter of the Black Death.
Yeah, that's probably how
The,
it went from Asia to Europe.
the Italian merchant post was in Kaffa, and they were well known for slave trade. This is what they did
Exactly.
for centuries. They were slave traders before
And Tana was not the
transatlantic slave
best.
trade.
Right. The transatlantic slave trade shifted where the center of slave trade was in the European sphere. But in the 13 and 1400s before Columbus, the slave trade center was actually the Black Sea with these
Yeah,
so-called Tatar slaves being
yeah,
sold all over the place, all through the Africa, Eastern Mediterranean, and Europe. I think Marco Polo, his will says he has a Tatar slave. But that's like Italy was really buying these slaves, and it was kind of illegal. You weren't supposed to be doing this, but people were doing it anyway. And especially after the Black Death created a labor shortage, Italy was devastated by the
of
Black Death,
course.
of course, in the 1340s.
They had no
And then
choice.
yeah, they justified it. They need these slaves. So that's when Tana really grew, because Tana is actually kind of out of the way. Tana, another thing why we shouldn't think that the great city of Hornak is Tana is that Tana stayed small for a long time because Crimea was the real center of the slave trade for Italians. That was
Oh,
like the prime place to go.
oh,
Tana's a little bit out of the way. You have to go up the Aral Sea,
of course.
like farther northeast, and then get to this
2,000
Don River where
kilometers away from Crimea.
yeah. So the reason Tana became successful in the 1300s, one, you have the Black Death, but two, the reason it suddenly blew up as a city was because Venice got kicked out of Crimea by its rival Genoa. They were fighting for control of this slave trade, and the Venetians lost out. But they were okay.
Yeah. So we were talking about the slave trade in Crimea, and different. We're talking also about involvement of Italian city-states, Genoa and Venetian Republic. They were the most active. Pisa was also active. They were hubs of slave trade back in the day. Also, we spoke about the problems with identifying Ornas as Otrar. This is another problem because Carpini's itinerary describes the route eastward to Mongolia, and he was talking about the the Bismarians and how he moved the river and passing the series of Yangikent.
Right. So Tana doesn't make sense because when you look at the details, as modern scholars have, it just the city wasn't not there in the 1240s when these people passed through, these Italians, and they don't mention the city of Tana. Uh, But it's important to remember that they didn't go to Urgench. On their itinerary, it's clear they never went to Urgench. And I think so because of that, they were a little bit confused. They're basing everything they're writing about in the case of Urgench on just things they've heard from people. So they mess up the geography a little bit. Carpini's companion, Benedict the Pole, provides some confusing details and mentions Gazaria. So that was a reason that people thought it was the Black Sea and Tana. Gazaria is Crimea. And then they also described that Hornak or Ornas was on the same river as Yagi Kent, as you mentioned. And we know this city, Yagi Kent, was on the Sirdaria River. It's another major river north of the Amu Darya. Both of them can and flow into the Aral Sea and do. But the Sirdaria is far away enough from Urgench that if you believed Carpini was correct about this detail, that the same river flows through Yangi Kent and Barchan. Well, we know these are Sirdaria rivers, Sirdaria cities. They're on the Sirdaria River, and Urgench is not. So some historians have therefore, on the basis of the description provided by the European travelers, they disqualified Urgench, and they looked instead at another city that starts with a vowel sound, Otrar, which is on the Sirdaria River, or close to it, and may have been even closer to it in the 1200s. And so they say, oh, Otrar, it's Ornas, Otrar, close enough. And they make this comparison because that was a city of some, it was a trading city. It's in modern Kazakhstan, its ruins. And it was destroyed by the Mongols. It was the first city of the Khwarezmian Empire that the Mongols destroyed. Its governor had killed Chinggis Khan's traitor ambassadors, and that started their war. So it had a very famous destruction, the hands of the Mongols. So they thought, okay, there's a big trading city. It was destroyed by the Mongols in this campaign of the 1220s. Otrar matches that description. But the problem is, Otrar, I don't think it had Rus and Greek traders, which is described in the source, whereas Urgench would have had them. The Rus Chronicles mention Urgench because some traders from Rus did actually go there. They had some knowledge of it. But Otrar is quite a bit farther east and closer to Mongolia. And it doesn't really show up in European sources unless you believe Ornas is it. And another problem with Otrar, to me, is the fact that Otrar was quite a natural citadel. It was a raised piece of land. It might not have been that close to the Sirdaria River. And all the descriptions from the Asian sources of Otrar being captured describe the Mongols kind of climbing up the hill. And there's a fortress up on the hilltop, and they scale up the fortress, and the defenders of it are on the top of it. And when the Mongols show up to attack Otrar, it says that the defenders of the city can see from their high point, you know, from their kind of acropolis, they can see the Mongol tents all spread out. And why that's a problem is because both European and Asian sources, pro-Mongol and anti-Mongol sources, describe a key event in the siege of Ornas was that the city was flooded with the irrigation dams were burst open intentionally by the Mongols to flood the city. And Carpini says this is how they ultimately took the city. They flooded Ornas, whichever city it is. And a very early Arab contemporary source, Ibn al-Athir, describes this flooding of the city in great detail. Now, that would make sense in a very low-lying, flat city like Urgench, which was close to the Aral Sea and the Amud area and all these irrigation ditches with the water of the river mixed into them, it would make sense that the Mongols could attempt a strategy like that
Yeah.
on Urgench because it's right by the sea, right by the Aral Sea, and it's a flat land. It's a perfect trader city because it's
Yeah.
not hard to get to. But Otrar is a natural fortress. It's on a hilltop naturally, and then they've also built up the Acropolis, the
So
Ark,
it was,
the
yeah,
fortress.
it wasn't accessible by the water. You couldn't flood them if they were on the hilltop of few hundred meters, for instance.
And then, yes, and then on top of that, archaeologists look at the site of Otrar. It's quite well preserved. I really hope someday I get to go there because it is quite amazing. It's
Yeah.
still in this ruined medieval state. Um, Archaeology does not show signs of flooding there. It doesn't seem like it would even be possible. It'd be like flooding a mountain fortress. Not quite that bad, but like it's not described in the sources when Otrar is taken. They rather describe ascending the hill, climbing up the walls,
Yeah.
climbing up the fortress. Uh, and so that's why I don't think Otrar could be the city because too many sources mention flooding or an attempt to flood this great merchant city, and that just does not suit the location and natural layout of the
Yeah.
city of Otrar. And on the other hand, Urgench, archaeology bears out the fact that the irrigation ditches were destroyed in the 1200s, and it was some kind of man-made damage to the irrigation trenches and dams, and it actually affected the Aral Sea, the size of the Aral Sea. So you have archaeological evidence saying Otrar wasn't flooded, but something happened near Urgench that had huge environmental effects in the coming decades. Some alteration of the water route. Well, that's documented in European and Islamic authors from the 1200s.
I mean, we have the aerial photography of Otral, which was recently taken in 1218, and it's relatively big site on the tell or hill. So it doesn't look very likely that they managed to take over the city by flooding them.
Yes, and so it
We're talking
does
about topography.
right. The topography just doesn't suit this
No.
story. And then if you have an author in Syria or Iraq, and he's describing the same thing that Carpini described about the fall of the city, and you have the Persian author Rashid ad-Din says that Chinggis Khan's sons were trying to flood the city by altering the dikes and opening the water. And then we have archaeological evidence that something like that did happen at Urgench. In fact, the city was moved eventually. There is still, like I said, there is still an Urgench, but it's not Konya Urgench, which is just ruins today. Um, it all points, when you kind of combine the sources and you imagine that these people can't really, these different authors didn't influence each other. If they're saying something that matches, it's a useful detail.
We have another evidence which supports the identification of Ornas as Konya Urgenç.
Yeah, what is it?
Well, we have evidence from Western literature. Of course, they describe Ornas as a mysterious legendary city, but they also connected Konya Urgenç to be Ornas. So this is the one account which contradicts the friars' accounts. We're talking about the Dominican friars.
Yes. I think
Simon of Saint Quentin,
yes, I think
because he
oh,
was
right.
talking also about
Well, you
the
know,
he
they
was talking also about the siege of Isfahan when Mongols also used a similar flooding technique. This,
yeah, I think they tried it a few times,
yeah,
but it all depended if the place. So if you look
exactly.
at old pictures of Isfahan, it looks like it's almost built on an island in a stream.
Yeah.
Like there's streams everywhere. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did the same tactic at Isfahan and at Urgench. On the other hand, Simon of St. Quentin might have made a mistake, and he's actually thinking of Urgench. But it wouldn't surprise me if they did the same tactic
Hmm.
at two places that were just surrounded by water and waterworks, very unstable kind of places. If you intentionally damage the irrigation ditches and you intentionally flood these places, um, I don't know of too many other examples of the Mongols doing this flooding technique, but generally it's documented that they would attempt this if the situation was suitable.
I mean, we were discussing the Mongol techniques in besieging cities, and of course, by time they developed the machinery to break the siege and take over the city. However, some of fortifications managed to sustain their attacks, and it was typical for the second invasion in Europe when Hungary built the system of fortifications on its frontier towards the Golden Horde, and they didn't run over Hungary like in the first invasion.
Yes.
How
And in the
significant?
first,
Yeah, please go ahead.
oh, just in the first invasion, Hungary had these county capitals
Yeah, of
all through the country, but they were not built on strategic hilltops. They were just built in the flat countryside
course.
with mud walls, and they were pretty much annihilated. So they were all wiped out almost completely. So the county capital fortresses were totally inadequate to withstand the Mongols. So the Hungarians completely reformed their defenses.
Yeah.
Um, and Urgench is not a very good defensible site. It's a place that formed because it's an important Silk Road city. It was easy to reach, and it's in the one of the best oases in the entire region. The Horazm oasis is like kind of like the Fergana Valley. It's one of those really valuable, like not irrigated, just well watered naturally sites. So this would be a place that attracted traders trying to pass through the deserts and what have you in that region. So it wasn't really meant to withstand a siege. It was meant to be an economic hub
Exactly,
and a hub
economic
of
hub,
trading.
and the peaceful place where different civilizations and ethnic groups merged together and benefited from from economic interconnectedness.
Yeah, and that's what they describe. Carpini and these people, they say it's not just any ordinary trading city. It's got people. It's very cosmopolitan. It's
Yeah,
got people from all over the world coming there, and that would match the oasis of Horazm and its great city, Urgench. Um, so if a lot of the time, we're very doubtful of these guys like Carpini because they seem to believe a lot of legends. They write things uncritically, but I think there's fact in them. It's just they make mistakes, and that making of mistakes makes sense when you realize that Carpini and his party, Benedict the Pole, C. de Bridia, these writers who've left these books, they didn't actually go to Urgench ever. It wasn't on their route. They would have gone down the Sirdaria River, Ural River, down the Sirdaria, and into the sort of Kyrgyzstan, Taras region. near the Tian Shan Mountains, and then up they would have started northeast again. But they bypassed. They never touched the Amu Darya River, and that's so they were just basing it on secondhand information. That's why they uh, mismatch details. They think it's on the wrong river, etc. But it really is the candidate that makes the most sense because how they described it was it's a city of traders from all over, the people speaking Greek, Rus, Arabic, Persian. But the ruler, it said, the rulers are Saracens, and that would match the Khwarezmian city of Urgench in the early 1220s. Whereas a city like Otrar you wouldn't have Greek and Rus traders there. It's not documented anywhere
Yeah.
else.
What do you want
So it's a
yeah, please go
tragic.
ahead.
Well, just what Carpini and his colleagues offer is this story of the kind of tragic fall of these cities in the Silk Road region. The story is well known from other sources how totally devastated Khwarezmian cities and landscape was by the intentional sabotage of the irrigation ditches by the Mongols. It's because this was a total war they
Of
were
course.
waging in the 1200s. They did this kind of stuff, by the way. They intentionally flooded places in China. So the Mongols are documented doing this kind of thing on the other side of Asia, intentionally breaking the Yellow River Dam to flood it, to fight the Jin, etc. So they were no strangers to doing that. So
Of
it
course.
matches the evidence. But the interesting upshot of it all was Jochi, when this campaign was finished, in a sense, his career was finished. He just sort of faded off into the sunset in the west. He moved out into the prairies, the Great Steppe, and he disobeyed Chinggis Khan's orders to continue conquering, which rumor had it caused Chinggis Khan to poison him. And there's another story that when I don't know if it's true,
Exactly.
but there is a
We don't have
story.
evidence that he poisoned him.
Yeah,
We have all kinds of
no,
suspicious and incoherent accounts about different epochs in the ancient history. First of all,
right.
historiography back then was underdeveloped. I'm not going to say that everything modern is always better than everything ancient, but regarding historiography, we didn't have a scientific approach until 20th century, or let's say
Yes.
19th century.
Yeah, they
We
kind of
cannot take
just
serious with people who are just chroniclers and gave all kinds of hearsays as a valid account or valid information about historical events, or they would justify different geopolitical moves by interference of gods and interference of one god. This is not serious. So we don't have evidence that he poisoned him. Like we don't
no,
have evidence that the Roman Emperor Caligula was a total madman, because people who wrote his biographies were motivated by personal gains to represent the caste, even not the class of senators, but the caste of senators who were directly uh, opposing his uncle Tiberius and Caligula. But of course, it's another topic, and I'm just showing my skepticism towards ancient historians. I trust more modern day historians who combine different sources, and they have a critic of sources. Ancient historians, they didn't have
yes,
this type of critique. Even if we read Carlyle, who's more recent, he's describing all historical processes by deeds of few extraordinary men. So two extraordinary men can create all kinds of miracles, like magicians. And all his books are based on that concept of history.
Well, it's very interesting though. Yeah, you're right. There's so much that is just hearsay and rumors and who knows. But with the Mongol Empire's historiography, at least what we have, which is kind of unique in pre-modern sources, is that we have such a wide geographical and linguistic range of authors who that they can't all share,
Yeah,
information with each other. So
of
it's
course.
very funny or interesting to see where they overlap. And Carpini did go down the Sirdaria River, and he said they're just ruins of cities everywhere, destroyed by the Mongols. He just
Yeah,
these
exactly.
smoldering ruins of these great cities. And Juvaini, who was the governor of Baghdad, when he was talking about the destruction of the Khwarezm Empire by Chinggis Khan, he said, even if many generations pass, we'll never go back. We'll never reach, the population and the splendor of these
Yeah.
places. And you could say that they're overlapping there. These two very different authors with different motivations. They do describe this destruction, and that was the route. The Sirdaria River was the route Jochi took as he advanced towards the Aral Sea. And then he went south and attacked Urgench. So he was the destroyer of those particular cities in this campaign. And I guess it just reminds you of how history changed so much by these events in the 1220s, how they have altered the landscape and the development of those regions
Of
in
course.
Central Asia. So this
And they always
Urgench story,
exaggerate. There's always exaggeration about numbers of military and the numbers of people who participated in certain battles. And even I watched some of historical podcasts and programs, and our colleagues, historians, claim that Friedrich Barbarossa came with 150,000 military to the Third Crusade, which is a nonsense. They didn't have such a big army at that time.
it's difficult to see how they logistically could
Exactly. There's no
support.
logistics for that army, and they didn't have enough money to mobilize 150,000 people in 12th or 13th century. Even when Napoleon
Yes.
attacked Russia with 600,000 people, with all kinds of coalitions, at that time it was probably the biggest army in the history of mankind. So we have to be careful with figures.
Yeah, and it perished in mass starvation and cold,
Yeah,
like you kind of expect.
yeah, of course, of course. Do you want to add something?
Um, I think that's good. I guess my one caveat is yes, of course, our historians, our past writers, they mix up information, they believe legends. Carpini was repeating a
Yeah,
lot of silly things. They're almost like the Alexander legend about the sun rising and blowing wind over a
yeah,
certain nation, and that people with a magnet mountain that would pull people's armor off of them.
yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that people are skeptical of him, and yet, in the case of Urgench, I'd say he's really describing an event that you can cross compare with such diverse sources. The Mongolians' own Mongolian language secret history remembers this event. Abul Ghazi Bahadur wrote about it, and they all sort of match. And I think in this case, Carpini and his party, they've made some errors that have caused a lot of confusion for historians, but there is a solution. So Hornak is Urgench, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for one
Yeah.
more session.
Thank
And I wish you all the best. I wish you can continue with your work. And I wish that you're going to break all kinds of deadlines in coming weeks.
thank you. I'll need the good wishes.
Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch. All the
Yeah.
best.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.